have a lot to do and not enough time to do it. I have two book reviews, and then I'm hoping to finish this book, which is yay big. I took this on my European vacation thinking it'd be a great time, forgetting that I get motion sick, so I listened to things more than I read them. Only realized also that this was the first book in the set, which is actually not that much smaller now that I have them together, but still very large books, and I don't know when I'm going to have time to actually sit down and finish reading it. Today's book, however, is Homecoming by Kate Morton, and we all know how much I love Kate Morton. I'm actually very proud of myself because this is probably the most recent and quickest turnaround for a book that I've ever done, but it's because I love Kate Morton, and it just so happened that her new book came out while I was on vacation, and I was able to finish it very quickly. Unfortunately, I didn't love this book. I thought it was subpar. My least favorite book has always been The Distant Hours, not because it's a bad book, but because it's so sad. This book is my least favorite because I don't think it lives up to her standard. What makes her books so good, aside from the crafting, is almost the tragedy of all of them. They all have some sort of romantic aspect where you want the lovers to be together, and for some reason it doesn't work out. In this book, the romance, you don't even know it's there until the very end of the book. And I guess it's supposed to be that, oh my gosh, I didn't see it coming moment. But because the romance fueled the events of the book, I wanted more of an indicator. I wanted Morton to hint at it more. I had some guesses right, I had some guesses wrong, but then even on top of that, we usually have, because it's generally a past and a present timeline that commingle to create the problem, or to solve the problem, or to create and solve the problem. And so we will have largely the tragic romance in the past. And then in the present, our protagonist will have a romance of their own. And this one, there wasn't one, which I thought it was a dropped subplot. The book is about this young woman named Jess Bridges. Jess Bridges. Her grandmother is Nora Turner Bridges. So I couldn't remember if she was Turner or Bridges. I think she's Bridges. Anyways, so she's from Australia, which I will say, Morton is Australian. However, her novels largely take place in London, and I think she has since relocated to London, so they might have ties to Australia, but by and large, they take place in London. So I thought it was quite nice to actually have a book set in her homeland. Anyways, she has left Australia and she's been living in London for some time. She is, I guess, coming off of a sudden bad breakup where she had been with this guy for some time. Things seem to have been exactly what they should be, only for him to some way, somehow either dump her and then get the new girlfriend pregnant, or got the new girlfriend pregnant and then he dumped her. In any case, this was not something she knew he wanted. One of their inside jokes, one of the things that she thought glued them together, was the fact that they didn't want kids. So she's still reeling from this. And that was what I thought was missed, because it was such a motivating factor for her in many ways that I thought we were going to get more of it, or that good riddance to him, I found someone better. She never finds someone, and then that subplot was, I felt like, largely ignored, greatly underdeveloped, and pointless. Like, I did not need to know about it. It didn't necessarily lead to her leaving London. it was a point of contention and sorrow for her, but it had no purpose. And it was very unlike Morton to have anything without a purpose. So I couldn't understand why we had this focus on her failed relationship when relationships were not a character development point for her. It wasn't something for her to get over and to understand that she didn't need that anyways. It wasn't a, oh well, I found someone better, or like it was absolutely nothing. Anyways, Jess is in London. She is essentially out of a job. She's a freelance writer, and she is musing about the loss of traditional writing and publishing and how this is affecting journalists' ability to make money. It opens like all of Morton's books with an event in the past. And this event is in, I think it's post-World War II, so I think it's like early 1960s. Isabel Turner is hanging the hangings for Christmas, and she is thinking about, I love my kids, but if I could have time without them, that would be super. And how she is from London, yet she's living in Australia, and now her children are like Australian heathens, and how she kind of misses being back home, and there has something that is going on between her and her husband that is causing some kind of a rift. And so she's hanging this garland or whatever it is, and she's struggling with it, only to notice that the postman has come. She's glad that he has come with her package when her husband is not there, because it's something that she doesn't want him to see, only to realize it's not the postman. I don't remember if this is when we jump into Jess, but we're going to go into the fact that now we transition into the point of view of another character, one of her neighbors, a guy named Percy. He and his wife Meg run the local grocers. He also he's like a firefighter of sorts, where I guess Australia suffers from wildfires or something in their brushland. So he is part of this volunteer team that goes to help contain or prevent things like that. He is on his way home, and he decides to let his horse rest in this this pond on the Turner's property. He is on his way there when he runs across Isabel Turner and 3 of her children. She has 4. There is Matilda, John, and Evie, and then the baby is Thea. I guess I've kind of spoiled a little bit. Thea is not actually found. Thea is an infant. She's like 6 weeks old, but he definitely finds Isabel and her 3 older children dead in this little clearing. The husband has been out of town. We learn a little bit about Percy and his past and how he met his wife and things like that. But when we jump back to Jess's time, she is hanging out with a friend and she's worried about how broke she is. She has pitched a story idea about old houses that nobody is wanting because they're like, this is not an investment piece. This is not something that people are going to relate to. We need you to come up with an idea of something that people are going to relate to. She receives word that her grandmother Nora has been in an accident and now she is in the hospital. She flies back to Australia, and the accident is that her grandmother, for some reason, she's quite old. I want to say like 80s, 90s. I can't quite remember. But she, for some reason, had tried to go into her attic. She fell, she hurt her arm. So it's not like a massive accident, but spoiler alert, she ends up dying, which I don't quite understand. We get the impression that Nora is very robust. She might be old, but she's got everything up here, and then everything here is quite all right too. I guess it's the fact that I don't think Jess really comes to Australia that often, so she hasn't actually seen her grandmother. But apparently her grandmother is a lot frailer than Jess realized, and so we get this whole thing of, oh my gosh, my grandma, is she gonna be okay? She does end up dying, and this leads to a whole host of other things. But in the meantime, Jess is trying to figure out why in the world her grandmother would have gone into the attic And we get a sense that she and her grandmother are very close because her grandmother raised her and she has a great deal of respect for her grandmother. We learn how the grandmother had come from wealth. Some way or another, the parents had lost their wealth, and then she had found a way to rebuild this wealth. Thomas Turner, Isabel, the dead woman, he is Nora's brother. She greatly admires him. There is a large age gap there, but he is the most important person in her life. And then he goes off to the war only to bring back a new wife and child. And so now we're like, how did Nora feel about Isabel? And then we start getting this history of Isabel and how her parents had died when she was younger, and somehow or another, I guess her aunt and or uncle took her in, but then essentially shipped her off to boarding school. Somehow she had enough money for this, and so even though she seemed like this real prim and proper English lady, she didn't come from that kind of a background. It just so happened that she went to boarding school where she was able to learn those skills. But people in this basically backward Australian town really revered her and her English ways, even though I guess she was friendly, but she wasn't friendly. She did not befriend the townspeople. Anyways, we learn that she has a love of reading. We learned that Percy had suffered from polio in his youth, and this also led to his love of reading. So we're learning things about these people, but Jess has no idea that this is part of her family's past. And this is something that she learns when she goes to see Nora. We discover that Nora, who had been married and had always wanted children, but had difficulty not conceiving but carrying to term, had been in Australia, and she had been heavily pregnant, and that she had given birth the day that she learned of her family's death. Within this town, the mystery is, what happened to baby Thea? Thomas never comes home. He decides that he is just going to try to sell this house. It doesn't work out. So he rents it out to some hippies in the 70s. They discover the body of a baby. So now everybody is like, baby Thea died. There is that question of who killed this family? All of this time, I just kept wondering who her love interest is going to be. Where is she going to start fitting into the story? Because the story, unlike most of Morton's books, where both the past and the present have their own very strong narratives, I felt like the strength of this one was in the past, and that Jess was something of a conduit. She learns, and I think, sorry, I say that I think, it's been about a week since I've read this book, and there's just been a lot going on, and the book was underwhelming for me, so it's not sticking the way that it should. But she had found that there was a book about her family written by this American journalist, and so I'm also thinking, okay, so the thing about the old houses isn't gonna stick. But what is going to stick is she learns about a family tragedy. She's going to write about that. It's going to revive her writing career, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. In the end, she does sort of write something along those lines, but I was like, people are going to want to read about mysterious deaths. Come on now. Kate Morton wrote an entire book about it. But anyways, so she learns that there is this American journalist who, for some reason, was in the right time and place, and he started writing about it. It, I guess, got published episodically, eventually got put into a book. She can't get her hands on a book from her local library, so she orders one off eBay. Literally, like the next day, she's in Nora's room. She falls asleep on Nora's bed and she discovers this book. And it turns out it's the book that she's looking for. Later, she's tried to get in touch with Polly, but for some reason, I guess she has the wrong number, because we eventually do get perspectives from Polly, which I didn't necessarily think we needed. Polly then, to us, reveals that she knew about all of this because when she and Nora, despite like the fact that she was Nora's entire world, because all Nora wanted was a child. Sorry, my hair is being my hair. So despite the fact that this baby was Nora's entire world, they didn't get along very well. Like Nora, in my opinion, I don't know if this is what Morton was trying to get at, but I thought it was pretty obvious that Nora essentially gaslit Polly because her marriage to her husband didn't work out. Apparently there were problems before she came to Australia because she was so laser focused on having a family that it drove a wedge between them. My feeling is that Nora gaslit Polly into thinking that she was incapable of being independent, like she needed Nora, but it had an adverse effect and it drove a wedge between them because she was smothering Polly. So Polly ends up going off to college. She gets pregnant, and as far as Jess knows, they don't know who the father is. But what we learn is that she'd fallen in love with this American, not professor, but almost like, not a student teacher, but like a guest lecturer. And he came from a prominent American family who was involved in politics. She comes to Nora and is like, we're engaged, and Nora, in my opinion, gaslighting her again, discourages her from getting involved with this man because she tells Nora that they're gonna go live in America, and of course Nora can't have that. So she drops the bomb on Polly about their family history. Her reasoning behind this is, look, if his family is involved in politics and you have skeletons in your closet, because actually I think the conclusion was that Isabel killed her children, that she was unhappy. Her dad had died, and then her mother apparently committed suicide. So the thought is that maybe it's some kind of postpartum depression or whatnot, but she committed suicide and she wasn't going to leave her children behind. In actuality, what she was going to do was she was going to leave her husband because he was, I guess, physically and emotionally unavailable. I would have preferred to have more of Thomas because he's built up, particularly concerning Nora, into being this like fantastic person. And we also learned he's very charismatic, but then she's unhappy and he's never home, and that he does have something of an emotional affair. I guess some woman had approached him and had proposed that they have a relationship, to which he said no. I personally think he was lying, but we don't get enough of him to know, and so it doesn't matter, which is another a subplot that I thought Morton dropped the ball. I didn't understand why we needed that if we're not going to get to know him, why none of this is going to come into play. Like, he legitimately was a non-entity. Where was I? Oh, right. The fact that Polly had a murderess for a relative would not look good if she married this guy in his political family. She then goes and breaks it off with him, only to learn that she was pregnant. She never tells him. At the end of the book, Jess does does she reach out to him? I don't think she reaches out to him, but she does read up on him and gets to know who he was. Let's say she does, just because I wanted her to. I mean, it may have been mentioned that was a plan of hers, but I don't remember her actually reaching out to him, which I think, again, is a tragedy. not in the normal sense that Morton creates tragedy, but that it was a ball that Morton dropped because that is something that she typically would have her characters do. Polly knows about this, and she, in her youth, had gone to the library, checked out the book, unbeknownst to Nora, because she knew Nora wouldn't want her to read this book. And this is the reason that Jess can't get her hands on it, because Polly never returned it. Then for the funeral, they are in the house together. Jess, again, Nora, and this is very uncharacteristic of Morton. She does have characters that you think are one way, yet in reality are another. Did you watch my review of The Secret Keeper? But in this instance, Nora is super philanthropic. She cares about others, yet she's not actually a good person. It's not mistaken identity. It is she was an extremely selfish person, and she wanted things to go her own way. It's quite possible that her philanthropic ventures were to atone for the mistakes or behaviors of her past. We don't know, because we don't know Nora. Nora, it turns out, is the entire reason that people think that Isabel killed her children. Polly and Jess are in the house together, and Jess is really annoyed that Polly is there because she believes that Polly had abandoned her when she was young, when in fact, Polly was going to take Jess. So when she gave birth, they lived with Nora. And then at a certain point, I think Jess was like 4 or something, Polly was like, I need to get us out of here. I want to be independent. I don't want to live in my mother's house. So she's looking into places of her own, only for Nora to find out and, gaslight her. Then, for some reason, I forget what it was, Polly goes and moves elsewhere. I think the rationale was that Jess would come eventually. I think the intention was that Jess would eventually come and stay with her. Maybe it was so she could set things up. In any case, she's trying to keep in touch, and slowly but surely, Nora prevented them from speaking with each other and gave Polly in particular the impression that Jess didn't want to talk to her, that Jess was doing just fine without her, when in reality it wasn't true. But Polly then essentially was like, well, I mean, if she's better off without me, I guess she's better off without me. We have all this family drama, and Jess is really annoyed that Polly is there. Polly says, you know what, like, I need Jess to know, or actually she knows that Jess is already aware because the housekeeper had let her know that Jess had been asking questions about Halcyon, which was the house, Thomas and Isabel's house. And so Polly is like, hey, I have this book. And Jess gets so mad at her because she held out on her. And it's like, you're not mad at Nora, even though Nora's the one that said, don't share this information with Jess. You're mad at your mother? So it all comes down to the fact that, this is something I guessed, Nora stole Thea. Because Nora gave birth, something went wrong, the baby died. Percy had been having an affair with Isabel. So who do you think, whose parentage was Thea's? That's right, Percy. And so I think he knew at this point, but anyways, so he wasn't coming to water his horse. He was actually coming in many ways to see Isabel. They had broken it off by this point because Marcus, his son, had seen them in flagrante. He had written Isabel a note. Isabel showed it to Percy. They broke it off, and then she was like, if I can't have you, I'm just gonna go home. And then this is where the whole idea of, if I can't have my children, or like my children are gonna come with me wherever I go, because she'd spoken to a lawyer. And then the confusion about, well, why didn't this lawyer step forward, is because he had died. There was this whole thing about mysterious deaths that never got resolved either. And this is also the person at the beginning of the novel that Isabel thought was the postman, which again, I thought was incredibly confusing because you're led to believe that her hanging the garland for this Christmas was the same Christmas in which she and her children died, when in reality, it's like a year apart. But then they connected because he was delivering the books that she thought the postman was bringing. So then they connect because he had gotten into books while he had polio, and because she was, I guess, in a loveless marriage, she was subject to a transferal of affections, and then this I don't understand, because his marriage was not loveless, but since he could never connect with his wife on books, he was open to a transferal of affections, which I just didn't get. Oh gosh, I was trying to just tell you about Nora, but I kind of have to go back to the beginning. Matilda, who is Isabel and Thomas's daughter, had been involved with Kurt, who was Percy and Meg's son. We are under the impression, because then Marcus, who was Percy and Meg's son, had been BFFs with John, who was Isabel and Thomas's son. And then all of a sudden, Marcus starts acting really funny and ghosts John. And then we get this whole side plot about John wanting to use this other kid's brownie camera for something. And I'm like, for what? We never learn. Anyways, a priest reveals that Marcus had caught his brother and Matilda in flagrante, which I'm like, did he, like, in the end, did he make this priest believe it was his brother and Matilda, but he'd actually seen his dad and Isabel? I'm not quite sure. I do think that he had seen his dad and Isabel, not Kurt and Matilda. However, Kurt and Matilda had been doing the thing, and then Matilda, which I guess Matilda apparently was pregnant, which is another side plot, because she had got her sister Evie to steal something for her, and I was like, what did she steal? I have no idea what was stolen, except perhaps it was something that could help her terminate the pregnancy. We don't know unless I completely missed it. Please fill me in if you know what Evie took. We have all these little side plots from the children, and I'm just like, I have no idea what's going on here. None of them came to fruition. None of them mattered. They're just kind of red herrings as to, hey, maybe Marcus was involved. Maybe Kurt was involved. Who knows? Maybe the kid that John borrowed the brownie camera from was involved because he wasn't necessarily a good kid. So Marcus, wanting to punish Isabel, had caught a pufferfish. And very early on in the novel, we learn that this was something that Percy had wanted to share with his sons. However, they were growing up and they were growing away from him, and these fishing expeditions weren't happening as often as they used to. But Marcus had caught a pufferfish, and he was trying to figure out how to feed it to Isabel, because it's poisonous. It will hurt and or kill a person. But he can't figure it out, and he loses his nerve. But what he does is he tells his mother that his dad is having an affair with Isabel. The mother, Meg, who we all have come to know and love at this point, crushes or mixes this pufferfish in with fish paste that she then gifts to Isabel because it is Christmas. And she knows that it is Isabel's favorite. She knows that it is something that Isabel is not likely to share with anybody else. She has no idea that Isabel is going to, I guess, make sandwiches out of it because, and this is something else. I mean, okay, full disclosure here. There were many times I fell asleep. Give me a break. I was on vacation. I was jet lagged. I had a lot of bus rides. I fell asleep sometimes. So I don't really know. I have no clue really what was going on with the family dynamics. All I know, the marriage was kind of falling apart. except for the fact we really didn't get to see into their marriage. We just knew she was dissatisfied about certain things and that he was never around. But then also, I guess her relationship with her children in some sense was falling apart. She's stressed to some capacity. We don't quite know why. Obviously, we can't attribute it to whatever's going on in her marriage and her dissatisfaction with basically being in a mansion in the middle of nowhere without her husband to create family unity and to bond. She's like, hey, all of you kids, we are going on a picnic. Your aunt is not coming because she's too pregnant. It's too hot. It's just not going to work for her. But we are going to go. And she makes sandwiches using this fish paste, which, can I say, that sounds disgusting. Like, what is fish paste? It sounds like ground up fish created into a paste similar to the way we would make peanut butter and make a peanut butter sandwich, but I think that's absolutely disgusting. So this is what kills them. She had brought baby Thea, and baby Thea had been in the bassinet. Meg somehow found the baby, and she brought the baby back to her house, hid it in like their storage shed. Percy comes home after this whole fiasco of finding the dead bodies, and she's like, look what I have. And he's like, oh my gosh. He takes the baby, brings it to Halcyon, sure that Nora will find it because Nora takes morning walks. Apparently Nora hadn't been taking her walks because her baby had died, but on that morning she does decide to take her morning walk. Percy gets distracted because he's sure somebody has followed him, and it turns out it's Marcus. And in the moments that he is trying to figure out who has followed him, she comes out of the house, finds the baby, takes the baby inside, and now he's like, did the baby get taken away by wolves? Basically, for 20 odd years, he believes that the baby is dead. There is like this girl named Becky Baker who has been helping Isabel around the house, who sees Nora around town with this baby and is like, you need to give that baby back. That baby's not yours. But nobody had seen her baby. For me, I thought this was a little weak because a 6-week-old child is going to be far bigger than its newborn counterpart. So even if it's a month later, like, you're not gonna look at this older child and be like, you're the newborn. I don't know. Anyways, Nora, coming full circle, takes Polly as her own, passes Polly off as her own, goes back home, and there we go. At some point, Polly does come to Australia, or to this territory of Australia, to check out Halcyon. She meets Kurt, who is her half-brother. He invites her to a family meal. By this point, Meg has died. She had revealed the truth to Percy, but because she had some form of dementia, it had been really garbled until this family dinner when he sees Polly and he recognizes who Polly is. He puts the pieces together about Kurt's role, and then what Meg did, and then ultimately what Meg caused. And he tells Polly, and she, who has never felt connected to her mother, has this really wonderful evening with her unbeknownst biological family, and he's like, yeah, you should come back more. And of course, she promises, knowing she's never gonna come back. Jess, she at the end decides that she wants to go to Halcyon, and she and Polly are reconnecting. I think Polly has moved to this Australian territory, and they may or may not be buying the old house. I think I've covered everything. We do get a look into the guy, the writer who had written this book about this incident. His name is Daniel Miller. When he first did all of his interviews, they were pencil and paper. When he comes back after the baby is discovered, he does some recorded interviews, and it's at this point that he realizes what Nora has done. And he feels so guilty, essentially, about publishing a lie that he writes this addendum in a way that doesn't excuse him, but also doesn't tell the truth, because he promised Nora that he wouldn't tell anybody, and it wasn't until after his death. And Jess reaches out to people connected to him, and then she hears from his niece that the niece sends her, and then not after he dies, but after Nora dies, that she sends this recording, and she and Polly listen to it, and at some point the realization is that Polly isn't Nora's, and that Daniel Miller knew the truth. The whole tragic love story was that Percy and Isabel couldn't be together, but I thought that this being the foundation of the novel and the whole reason that these people died, it wasn't a factor in the story. We had no indication that Isabel had been in a relationship with somebody. We had no indication that Percy had been unfaithful to his wife. The only indication that they could have been involved was the brief mention of him having polio and discovering a love for reading that a boy his age or of his generation should have been embarrassed about, and the fact that she was a lover of books during her youth as well. Did we know that was what was in the secret package she didn't want her husband to know she was receiving? No. And I missed that. I missed the unrequited love, or that we're not supposed to be together, but we should love. I was so frustrated that I had no push and pull. There was no tension in this novel. There was nothing pulling at my heartstrings saying, oh, if only, and I believe they should. I missed the romance or the romanticism that Morton usually infuses into her novels. It wasn't very intricate. We had two plots. There was the mysterious death of these people, and then there was Jess, who was dealing with family drama. And then we see why there's family drama and how it connects back to the past. There was no surprise. It was a letdown when we learned the truth. I completely understand Meg's motivation, but the fact that she killed a woman, I was like, so did she have any kind of mental issues that would have factored into her being like, okay, well, my husband cheated on me, so I'm gonna kill a woman? Well, there we go. You know, if you like it, I'd love for you to comment down below, talk to me a little bit, subscribe, like, do all that kind of stuff. If you don't want to, that's a-okay. I just enjoy the fact that you're here. Bye.